Thank you. It is great to be here. So, Evan, that's fantastic material. Thank you very much. Halloween is kind of the same way in my family, but my kids are so well trained. They know that I like cherry flavored candy. So I come home periodically and I'll find a little like cherry starburst on my keyboard or something like so that I don't have to reach in their bags. They just automatically come give it to me. Now, our question here today is what laws and policies best protect life and the family? Now, the best policy in a free nation is often no law at all, but leave it to the people to govern themselves. This is most often the best policy to protect our unalienable rights and will most often be the best protection to family. Let me explain. When considering anything in life, we must consult natural law. Now, natural law is simply the way that nature, or nature's God, has put things in motion. There are natural laws of science. For example, what goes up must come down, equal and opposite reaction, those types of things. There are natural law principles for human happiness. The Ten Commandments, for example, is an outline of those most fundamental principles. There are natural law principles for good government as well. And when you institute those natural law principles, amazing things happen. It's a miracle. It's an absolute miracle when you unleash the mind of man. Now, what were they using when they were plowing their fields in Jamestown? They were using a stick plow, the same way that mankind had been plowing their fields for about 5,000 years. Their transportation was walking or animal power or wind power for their ships, the same way that mankind had been traveling for about 5,000 years. Their medicines were made up more of noxious concoctions and superstitions rather than any kind of science. They thought alcohol was a staple food. Some still think that. They were living remarkably similar to how mankind had been living for 5,000 years. Then we had a 180-year period of trial and error, from Jamestown in 1607 to the Constitutional Convention in 1787. 180 years to work out natural law principles of self-government. Once we wrote the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution of the United States, an absolute miracle occurred. We went from ox cart to space travel in less than 200 years. We went further in 200 years than mankind had gone in the 5,000 years previous. You might say we made a 5,000-year leap. Now, that's the title of the book that each of you should have gotten in your bags, a gift from the National Center for Constitutional Studies. Now, this book outlines the 28 fundamental principles of natural law, the principles of liberty, in which the founders said would lead any nation to peace and prosperity if they would simply implement those principles. In it, we can look to Principle 26 to get some insight on the family. There it states, the core unit, which determines the strength of any society, is the family. Therefore, the government should foster and protect its integrity. So how is it best for government to do this? Like I said earlier, sometimes it's best for government to get their hands out of things in order to foster something or to support something. Let's first look at the attitude of marriage at the beginning of our country. Alexis de Tocqueville, who visited America in the 1830s, he went about America to kind of discover what made us so great. And about marriage, he said, there is certainly no country in the world where the tie of marriage is more respected than in America, or where conjugal happiness is more highly or worthily appreciated. From his own pen, we have Franklin at the age of 46 emphasizing the importance of marriage as he attempted to dissuade a young friend from taking a mistress. He wrote, "Marriage is the proper remedy. It is the most natural state before man, and therefore the state in which you are most likely to find solid happiness. Your reasons against entering into it at the present appear to me not well founded. It is the man and the woman united that make the complete human being. Separate, she wants the force of his body and strength of reason. He, her softness, sensibility, and acute discernment. Together they are more likely to succeed in the world. A single man has not nearly the value he would have in a state of union. He is an incomplete animal, Franklin said. He resembles the odd half of a pair of scissors. The trilateral construction of the family, consisting of the father, the mother, and the children, raises the basic question of the duty of parents to their children and the respect with which children owe to their parents. John Locke stated that the authority of parents over children is based on an important principle of natural law. He said, "The power, then, that parents have over their children arises from that duty which is incumbent on them to take care of their offspring during the imperfect state of childhood, to inform the mind and govern the actions of their yet ignorant nonage, till reason shall take its place and ease them of that trouble, is what children want," he said, "and the parents are bound to provide." Now, Locke also said that the reciprocal responsibility of children to honor and obey their parents is equally specific. "As God," he said, "hath laid on them, the parents, an obligation to nourish, preserve, and bring up their offspring, so he has laid on the children a perpetual obligation of honoring their parents." John Locke then teaches that the bond between parents and children cannot be broken by anybody or anything, including government. He said, "The nourishment and education of their children during their minority is a charge so incumbent upon the parents for their children's good that nothing can absolve them from taking care of it." Now, entering into the family unit is an unalienable right. We know that this is a natural law principle because it is nature, not government, that places us into families at our birth. Perpetuating that family unit through marriage is therefore a natural, unalienable right. As the Declaration of Independence states, governments are instituted to protect rights. Governments do not issue rights, nor can they define rights. Rights are issued and defined by the laws of nature and of nature's God. With that in mind, government should be limited and divided and subdivided. As Jefferson said, "The way to have good and safe government is not to entrust it all in one, but to divide it among the many, distributing to everyone exactly the functions he is competent to. It is by dividing and subdividing until it ends in the administration of every man's farm by himself, by placing under everyone what his own eye may superintend, that all will be done for the best. What has destroyed liberty and the rights of man in every government which has ever existed under the sun? The generalizing and concentrating all cares and power into one body." Now, as we enter into social contracts with each other, there are three very important components that must exist for the contract to be successful. First, that contract should be based on natural law principles, principles that are already defined by nature and of nature's God. Second, divide power and establish clear boundaries for those powers. And third, enforce those boundaries. These three things can only be done by those who ultimately possess the power, and that is the people. Now, from there, you can construct your government in whatever form you think is best to secure your safety and happiness. Whatever form it takes is completely up to you, but whatever it is, make sure you enforce it. Jefferson said, "The natural course of things is for liberty to yield and government to gain ground." So the people are the only ones with a vested interest in enforcing those boundaries. In America, we carefully defined government boundaries. Our federal government, for example, is limited to 20 powers delegated to the legislative branch, 6 powers delegated to the executive branch, and 11 types of cases to the Supreme Court. And our states are structured similarly. By design, marriage was left outside of the bounds of government, and definitely outside the bounds of the federal government, and for the most part outside the bounds of our state governments as well. Marriage was left to family and churches. Now, absent a church, someone with an official title could perform a marriage, such as a judge or the captain of a ship, but then it ended there. The framers discovered that the best policy for marriage was to leave it outside of the bounds of government. Marriage was defined by those who actually engaged in it, and they defined it as a union between a man and a woman. They believed that marriage was ordained of God to bind the family unit, to make the sacred gift of procreation and rearing children a covenant with each other and with God. If a man and woman wanted to engage in the sacred natural right of procreation, like all rights, there would be a duty and responsibility attached to that right. The duty was to raise children in love and righteousness, to teach them the laws of nature and of nature's God, and the civil laws, to instruct them of their own boundaries within their own principles of liberty and the boundaries of their government. They covenanted that they would sacrifice their entire lives to see this duty through. Till death do they part. Now that was marriage. It was not for the faint in heart. It was not just for the man and woman's happiness, but to bind the family unit. The definition was the union between a man and a woman with a purpose to bind them to their duty. Then we began to redefine marriage. Now, I'm not talking about our new 21st century definitions. I'm talking about over the last 300 plus years, we began to redefine it. Marriage was originally a man plus a woman, and it was performed within the family or within churches. Then we decided we wanted government to keep track of marriages, so we let government redefine it to a man plus a woman plus a license. Then we started passing laws to prevent interracial marriages, and so government redefined it as man plus a woman of the same race plus a license. Then we did not want any of this first and second cousin business, so we again let government redefine it as a man plus a woman of the same race, not related, plus a license. Then we went to man plus a woman of the same race, not related, with compatible blood types, plus a license. Then in 1969, California became the first state to enact no-fault divorce. This was a concept dreamed up in communist Russia in the 1920s, specifically designed to eliminate the institution of marriage, primarily to dissolve or eliminate family dynasties. That led to the definition of man plus a woman of the same race, not related, with compatible blood types, plus a license, minus any real binding covenants, duties, or responsibilities. To no surprise, this contributed to a sharp increase in the divorce rate in the 1980s, so we decided to redefine it again by adding tax breaks to encourage people to stay married. So now the new definition went man plus a woman of the same race, not related, with compatible blood types, plus a license, minus any real binding covenants, duties, and responsibilities, plus tax breaks. That's our new definition of marriage. We have spent centuries redefining marriage, and we have done so by letting government define and redefine it again and again. Now we have put the courts in a very tough position. We are now asking them to make rulings based on two conflicting natural rights: our right to enter into the covenant we call marriage, and that all of the laws need to be for all of the people, all of the time. And we have some individuals in our society that do not desire to enter into marriage and the family unit as we define it. But they see that government is giving an exclusive entitlement in the form of tax breaks to those who have been engaged in marriage. So they go to government and they say, hey, you're giving some free apples to those people. We want some of those free apples. And then the courts are stuck with this all of the laws for all of the people, all of the time principle. Now what are the courts to do? Should it be any surprise that after decades of telling government to define and redefine marriage, that they would then take it upon themselves to again redefine it? If we consent to government defining marriage, then we are declaring that they have the authority to define it, and so therefore we must consent to them redefining it. If government has the power to define, it has the power to redefine. The problem is not now. The problem is that we did not enforce government boundaries because at the time it suited us to not enforce them. This issue reminds me of a quote about government from George Washington when he said, "Like fire, it is a dangerous servant and a fearful master. Never for a moment should it be left to irresponsible action." I propose that, as with all things, we place everything in its rightful place, that marriage should be placed back outside of the bounds of government and back into the sole hands of the people. Those with a different lifestyle should not approach government and say, hey, you're giving free apples to those people, we want free apples. because that would be allowing government to define them as well, and they too would eventually find that that would come back and bite them. They should say, hey, you're giving those people free apples. That's not within your bounds. Stop giving them free apples. And we should join them in saying that. Folks, those tax breaks come at a very high cost. And personally, my marriage cannot be bought with tax breaks. I believe the family is sacred. I believe the covenant of marriage is a sacred sacrament. I hold it close to my most sacred beliefs, alongside with other sacred sacraments, doctrines, creeds, and everything else within my religious practices. I would never want government to define those sacraments, doctrines, and creeds, so why would I want government to define marriage? The best policy in a free nation is often no law at all, but leave it to the people to govern themselves. It is most often the best protection of our unalienable rights, and will most often be the best protection of a family. Now, I've often been asked, when I've expressed this view, what about the children? How do we protect the children? How do we protect the sanctity of marriage? Protecting sanctity is always left to the culture of the people, and the culture is shaped by properly educating and rearing the children. This occurs through the relationship between the child and their parents, and primarily through the mother. Mothers, you are the guardians of our morals, values, and culture, not because men are immoral, but because you literally hold the future of our society in your arms and in your hearts. This education is done in many ways, but primarily through stories. Stories that are familiar and personal, stories that teach morals, values, and foster imagination, and stories of history, of our heroes and our villains. For more on stories, a little side note, I encourage you to attend our Freedom Stories Forum this afternoon. It's the Forum 3 at 3 p.m. in the Murano Garden Saloon, where you'll learn a little bit more about storytelling and the importance of that. Now, going back, in the case of abuse and divorce, this is within the bounds of government. The very definition of abuse is the violation of unalienable rights, and governments are instituted to protect those rights. That is within their bounds. If a child is harmed or neglected, or a spouse is abused, that is violating a series of natural rights, and government can engage. The courts have also given us an avenue to adjudicate our contracts. In this case, marriage. Divorce proceedings in a court can hold parties accountable to their duties associated with their contract. The definition of marriage does not need to be on the law books to protect unalienable rights or to adjudicate in the courts. There are many contracts that are brought to court that have no specific definitions within the law, but a judge will hear them nonetheless. So let us bring family back to where it belongs, in the family. Bring it close to our superintending eyes. We will protect our families better than any law or policy. To restate Jefferson, place under everyone what his own eye may superintend, that all will be done for the best. Now with that, I leave you with one last admonition, to simply go forth and proclaim liberty throughout all the land unto all the inhabitants thereof. Thank you.